Hey, everybody, this is Devin, Writing Daily, where we talk about the life of a writer, how to write better, how to write more, how to write so we finish our projects and get our books published and put ourselves out there and cover the gamut of the writer's life. Today is episode 92. How did that even take place? I'm not even sure, but thank you for hanging around with me during this time. So whether you're watching me on YouTube or listening on SoundCloud or iTunes or one of those million other things, welcome, Nora. Good to see you here. Anyway, what do I want to say? I'm kind of taking a departure today to talk a little bit about forbidden books. I've got a bunch of things to say, but I'm going to tell you a little story. And the little story starts with this, is that in my family home growing up, they had this really awful giant piece of furniture that was, it was just basically the radio. And I think it was Sunday evenings, I would listen to a show called Dr. Demento. And I mostly listened to that show for this song called Titties and Beers, which they couldn't even say titties. It was terrible, I'm sure, and very, very offensive. And that sort of opened the door to listening to a lot of other music. I listened to a lot of Frank Zappa, who said all kinds of ridiculous, inappropriate things. Right around the same time where I started listening to bands like The Who and Zeppelin, and they were sort of like so out there that they weren't to be listened to. It was like, this is, I think, during a point where there was too much distortion and regular folks were traumatized, terrified by the kinds of people who were into whatever they were into, drugs and terrible things. And so there was this point when I was listening to Dr. Demento, I'd turn it on like to the lowest possible setting and then press my ear against this giant speaker. And hopefully nobody heard it because I was kind of embarrassed and I didn't want to be caught listening to subversive music. So anyway, I'm reading this piece today. And by the way, welcome Bruce and Melissa and Sarah Saran and Ahmed. Anyway, welcome to everybody. And so what I am reading from is actually something that comes from Frank McCourt, the guy who did Angela's Ashes. And so this was the inspiration for today's episode. I wanted to read it to you. Then my mother began to behave in a very strange way. Ordinarily, she would sit up in bed at night and read by the light of a candle or a kerosene lamp. We were all in one room. She would leave her book on the table next to the bed, and she'd resume the next evening. One day, I noticed that her book wasn't being left on the table. It was being hidden. So where was it? When she went out, I ransacked the house looking for the book, and I found it pushed far under the mattress. It was Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. Well, I said to myself, if she's being so secretive about this, there must be some juicy stuff in there. I sat down to read For Whom the Bell Tolls and plowed my way through it. I was 11 years old. For an 11-year-old, that book is not the liveliest reading. When I came to the end, I felt cheated because nothing happened except this one scene where Robert and Maria got into the sleeping bag and the earth moved. I didn't know that was the dirty part. Along with Hemingway's being anti-Franco, caused the book to be banned in Ireland. I was furious that I had to read the whole book for nothing. So when I got older, for the most part, I'm loving, I'm a complete book nerd. And more importantly, I like reading about obscure, weird, different kinds of things. And so I wanted to share with you, just for a little break in the action, some of the books that were like, ooh, I think I need to read this kind of like under the cloak of darkness and not let anybody know. So I'm going to tell you some of these titles, which I think you may be amused or entertained by, and maybe even inspired to read. None of them are all that outrageous or anything like that, but they're all sort of like subversive, and they say things that are like, wow, that's sort of different. So anyway, I think perhaps one of the very first books where matter of fact, a dear buddy of mine recommended it to me. This was the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson, Robert Shea. Big, giant, fat book. Incredible. Jennifer, good to see you, my friend. So anyway, big, giant, fat book filled with, like details, sex, and pages of ridiculous band names and all kinds of bizarre subversive notions. And Robert Anton Wilson, even though this was written by both of them, Robert Anton Wilson was like a nutburger supreme and walked and explored every kind of consciousness and had a take on all this stuff. And he was completely fascinating. And that led me to eventually to a book called Prometheus Rising. I was almost going to say Cosmic Trigger. But that said, really fun, interesting, unusual, really different alternative philosophies. And one thing about that particular writer is that he offered all kinds of other, shall we say, interesting, unusual references to unusual writers. And one of them, who was either one of the greatest geniuses of all time or another nutburger supreme, was Buckminster Fuller. He is, again, sort of like universally, he wrote tons of books. He also invented things and did unusual things. He was, what do I want to say? Again, he's sort of like looked at as history as either sort of like a laughingstock nut or a really genius kind of person. Mara, good to see you here. All of that led to this guy who's probably, I think he's typically called the wickedest man in the world. I mean, at least that's what he was voted as in sort of like the 1920s in England, a guy by the name of Aleister Crowley. I'm not necessarily recommending that people run out and buy his books or read anybody of these books. I'm just telling you, these were sort of my forbidden books. And really, I'm doing this in part. I want to share with you a few of my secret books because I want to know what you guys are reading that's sort of like, geez, I don't even know if I want to tell anybody that I've read this book or I'm reading something. So it's kind of fun stuff. And then all of that led to a whole series of kind of like socially damaging, bizarre reads that come from a group. It was actually this. This was originally, I think I gave away my copy. I couldn't find it. It was called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and it goes into the whole story on Jesus Christ and maybe some things that people do not, matter of fact, I mean, highly heretical things. But Holy Blood, Holy Grail was an interesting book. And then this was the sequel, The Masonic Legacy. And so it threw me like in a spinning whirlpool of reading stuff that was just different. I mean, it went into a whole Knights Templar thing, which I think eventually became, what was that big famous book that Tom Hanks was in? I want to say it was Demons and Angels, but it was by the same writer. And what was it? Anyway, I can't remember the name of it, but it's this whole sort of Knights Templar and the origins of Jesus Christ and Christianity. There's some very subversive theories out there. And so personally, I take kind of the conspiracy things all with a grain of grain of salt, but they're entertaining, amusing reads. You take it for what it's worth. And that's why I presented these books today, because maybe you have some wonderful books that was like, oh yeah, these are sort of like the secret, almost maybe guilty pleasure types of reads, things that kind of go off on some weird direction that's unusual or different. Anyway, let's see. Bruce writes, right on. You know that you got it if it makes you feel good. Yeah, I'm hoping that does it for you too. So anyway, tomorrow we're going to be doing a new subject. And by the way, if you like what I'm doing, please consider subscribing on iTunes or YouTube, or certainly if you can click the like button or the wow button with some sort of fantastic enthusiasm, I would be grateful. And it also lets me know that I am on the right track. We're going to be doing another subject tomorrow on Writing Daily. So until then, thanks so much for joining me, and keep reading everything, whether it is traditional or bizarre or unusual. It is always gratefully appreciated. And thanks for being here. And tomorrow, another episode of Writing Daily.